The crime is at an all-time low. You feel like you're in a safe place when you're there. Tourism is booming. The economy is growing. International relations are sort of like El Salvador has become like people are competing. They're competing for El Salvador. You have Turkey, you have China, you have the United States sort of all wanting to do business in El Salvador now because of the changes that have been taking place. So El Salvador is in a great place now. I think it's going to get better. After being there on the ground, I can absolutely testify that the country is moving the right direction. I think there still needs to be a lot of work done in the rural parts of El Salvador where there isn't as much opportunity. You know, I was able to visit the rural parts. A lot of people come to El Salvador and they just visit the city, they visit the beaches. There's many rural parts of the country that still need help. They still need to be lifted up. So that should be a big focus for the Bukele administration and for the people of El Salvador for the future. But it's great how far they've come in just such a few short years. My parents had said it really was the last few years, ever since Bitcoin came around, that things have gone really quickly the right direction.
Hello guys, welcome once again to Bitcoiner Podcast. Today we're gonna have a really interesting interview. Probably you have seen this guy on the medias, but you know we don't follow the medias. We are here to learn about people behind every project or service or products that are doing in the Bitcoin space. So our approach is quite different. We follow the news as well because we cannot deny to see all what is going on, especially in the north in the US, but we also want to learn more about Bitcoiners. So today we have a special guest and we're going to learn a lot with Dennis Porter. So welcome to the show.
Hey Juan, thank you for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I know. I have seen that. I mentioned you that I noticed that you had family in El Salvador living there, so it's quite interesting. Like we're gonna discuss about that, but also we would like to learn a bit about the Satoshi Action Fund and of course the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve that you're working on so hard right now.
Yeah, excited. Well, my parents have lived in El Salvador for 15 years, and they've really seen all the change from a long time ago all the way to today. And really the last few years, as they say, has been the biggest change. So looking forward to chatting about El Salvador and strategic Bitcoin reserves. Of course, El Salvador being one of the first countries in the world to hold Bitcoin. So very, very much looking forward to the prosperity and progress that El Salvador is going to continue to make over the next decade.
Those are great, exciting news, and that's one of the things that I like the most. To see that people are aware about that, and we're spreading the word, and it's a snowball effect that just started in a small country like El Salvador. But hey, I always like to start a podcast if you can share a bit about your personal Bitcoin journey for people that probably just hearing the news about Dennis Porter, but they don't know exactly who this guy is. And when did you first understand the value of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I found Bitcoin in 2017. I was told by a friend that it was perfectly anonymous internet money. And I said, no way, nothing is perfectly anonymous on the internet. And so I started to research Bitcoin in order to be able to prove my friend wrong. Ultimately, when I was in there studying Bitcoin, trying to prove my friend wrong, I did prove him wrong, by the way, because it's not perfectly anonymous. But it is a big privacy enhancement. Bitcoin provides a significant privacy enhancement over the current systems. But while I was in there trying to prove him wrong, I was learning about Bitcoin, and there were things that I found about the technology that I really did fall in love with. And particularly, I fell in love with this idea that Bitcoin could be used as a tool to bank the unbanked and provide financial services to people globally. I mean, it's crazy. There's like 2 billion people on this planet at all times that they have no access to traditional banking. They have no way to save for the future. 2 billion people, that's nearly a quarter of the planet's population. It's 4 times the size of the United States, who they don't have the ability to save up for school, save up for a car, save up for their first home. We could be living in an environment where the next Einstein, the next great thinker, is coming from one of these places that doesn't have traditional banking. but we'll never know because they were never able to save up for their first textbook. So I'm very passionate about Bitcoin as a tool to provide financial inclusivity. It is money you can't discriminate with. It's permissionless. Anybody anywhere in the world can access it regardless of race, gender expression, immigration status. It really doesn't matter. All are welcome on the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network doesn't care what the color of your skin is, or what family you came from, or what religion that you practice, or who your political party is. Everyone is able to participate in Bitcoin equally. And that's really, truly a wonderful and magical thing that has not existed before with any monetary system in human history.
Absolutely. And, I was wondering that what inspired you to, because of course, what you're saying, it's the journey of a Bitcoiner that I have learned a lot and deeply understand that right now. But what inspired you to also fund the Satoshi Action Fund? In which time or a specific moment you decided to fund it, and why?
So Satoshi Action was launched in June of 2022. The reason why I decided to launch it is because, right now, today, everybody's feeling great. Everybody feels great about Bitcoin. They feel good about the future. They think that we are headed towards a good path, that the United States is going to adopt Bitcoin, that other countries are going to adopt Bitcoin. But it wasn't that long ago when we didn't feel that way, when we were worried about the direction that our country was headed. We were worried about where we were headed as a people. And Bitcoiners were concerned. They were worried if they were going to be able to access Bitcoin now and in the future. They were worried if they'd be able to hold their Bitcoin in self-custody. I was worried that I was going to have to move. I was going to have to flee the country in order to continue to hold my Bitcoin or sell all my Bitcoin, which are both very bad options. Of course, I would love to move to El Salvador. That would be nice. But generally speaking, I don't want to be forced to move outside of my country just because of my possession of Bitcoin. So when I launched Satoshi Action in June of 2022, it was this fear, but also concern generally about the direction of the country, and that we needed to do something in order to move the right direction, in order to help the United States understand the value of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin is aligned with American values. So we launched Satoshi Action in June of 2022, and we got to work right away educating lawmakers and regulators on the benefits of the technology. We also started to craft public policy so that once a lawmaker understood the technology, then he would have a piece of policy to introduce into law. A lot of lawmakers, they understand Bitcoin when you tell them about it. They get the value right away. They see how Bitcoin mining can be used as a tool for being able to balance the grid and to incentivize the growth of renewable energy. They see how Bitcoin can be a tool for inclusive monetary, for those around the world to participate in this inclusive monetary network. But at the same time, when you convince them that they need to like Bitcoin as much as me and you do, right at the end of that conversation, they say, okay, well, what can I do to help advance Bitcoin here in my country? What can I do to help advance Bitcoin here in my state? And that's where we provide model policy solutions so that lawmakers can immediately, once they decide they like Bitcoin as much as me and you, they can introduce legislation and hopefully pass it into law to protect Bitcoin and to protect the ability to access Bitcoin and to encourage the growth of Bitcoin in their jurisdiction. So, kind of going back to your question, it is Satoshi Action exists because we were going down a dark path and we needed to do something about it. We went on offense for Bitcoin with Satoshi Action, and we scored points for Bitcoin with Satoshi Action. And we're going to continue to score points for Bitcoin with Satoshi Action, not only here in the United States, but also across the world. We have lawmakers all over the world reaching out to us here in America, in Europe, in Latin America. We have lawmakers who are very interested in seeing their state and their country produce pro-Bitcoin legislation. We've been able to introduce 30 bills already as an organization. 30 pieces of legislation have been introduced because of us, and we've been able to pass 4 bills into law. So a lot of success, and we're just thankful to be and grateful to be able to make a difference for Bitcoin.
Absolutely. We're going to discuss more about that. But first, now that you mentioned El Salvador, where you explained all this, I'm really curious why your family chose to move to El Salvador, because you mentioned that it was 15 years ago, and it's not Bitcoin related because we started a few years ago. So what was their motivation? And probably you, even in person, have seen the change since the time has passed, right? So what are your thoughts on El Salvador right now?
Well, today it's in an incredibly great position. The country is growing, it's thriving. There are infrastructure projects all over the country. There are buildings going up. I was staying in a new building there too. It was beautiful, down just right downtown. So much progress has been made, especially on crime. I mean, my parents had told me when they first moved there, you could barely go out at night. It was very dangerous. You always had to be watching over your back, especially as an American citizen. But now that's all changed. You see crime at all-time lows. You know, the crime is I think it's lower even than the United States. And just not that long ago, it was one of the worst places in the world that you could be. The crime was out of control. It was hard to even be able to. Yeah, it was like literally like you couldn't find a worse place for crime. And the gangs were everywhere. The gangs were running the country practically. You had, look, at the end of the day, the gangs, when they're in control, it's a very dangerous situation. I lived in Juarez, Mexico for 3 years. The gangs are very much in control there as well. But in El Salvador, it's very sad because there's not a lot of opportunity in El Salvador, or there wasn't a lot of opportunity in El Salvador previously. And so a lot of young men would get asked to join these gangs, and they were very enticing. But sometimes they would be forced to join the gangs. A friend of my family was forced to join a gang, and when he rejected and said he was not going to join the gang, he was murdered in cold blood. So it was a very dangerous country. People were killed in the streets for not supporting the gangs, for not joining the gangs. People were worried about walking around at night. It was very dangerous. You couldn't even wear a nice watch on your wrist. You'd get picked up. You'd get mugged. But we're in a much better place now. The crime is at an all-time low. You feel like you're in a safe place when you're there. Tourism is booming. The economy is growing. International relations are sort of like El Salvador has become like people are competing. They're competing for El Salvador. You have Turkey, you have China, you have the United States, sort of all wanting to do business in El Salvador now because of the changes that have been taking place. So, El Salvador is in a great place now. I think it's going to get better. After being there on the ground, I can absolutely testify that the country is moving the right direction. I think there still needs to be a lot of work done in the rural parts of El Salvador where there isn't as much opportunity. You know, I was able to visit the rural parts. A lot of people come to El Salvador and they just visit the city, they visit the beaches. Yeah. There's many rural parts of the country that still need help. They still need to be lifted up. So that should be a big focus for the Bukele administration and for the people of El Salvador for the future. But it's great how far they've come in just such a few short years. My parents had said it really was the last few years, ever since Bitcoin came around, that things have gone really quickly the right direction.
Absolutely. By the way, what advice will you give to the politicians or the Bukele administrations to make it even better? Because there's a lot of efforts, like educational efforts, like, Mi Primer Bitcoin, Cubo Plus, No Nation, and those are for the students, or in the case of Mi Primer Bitcoin, any Salvadorians can go there and learn about Bitcoin, right? But in a political level, probably you have learned a lot, and now you're continuously learning in the States. But what else can we do? As I agree with you that we are in the right path, but what else can we do to make it even better?
I think there's two clear ways where there could be policy crafted around helping Salvadorians improve their life. One is on the energy side and one is on the savings side. So, when they launched Bitcoin in the country, they were the first in the world to buy Bitcoin and put it into a reserve. And then they were also quick to turn around and give Bitcoin to the people. Unfortunately, because of the first in the world, it's hard to get things perfectly right. And what happened was a lot of people took the Bitcoin and they sold it for dollars and they spent the money. I think a better policy would be something that helps the people to be able to have Bitcoin for the long term, something like a social security plan, something that you can put into a savings that is for the people and nobody can touch it. And it's just for the people. And they have to hold it for a long time. I think that it's important that we just really focus on making sure that people benefit from Bitcoin. Certainly the government and the city and crime has gone down and tourism is up, but there's a lot of individuals who don't experience the benefits of Bitcoin and they can experience it. I think a much more sophisticated rollout where you're able to get Bitcoin in the hands of people where they hold on to it for some time, that would be, in my opinion, a great project. I would love to do that in the United States as well. Additionally, there are many parts of the country where there's not a lot of cheap power. You can create cheap power virtually anywhere in the world, subsidized power with Bitcoin mining. The basic premise is that if once you build Bitcoin mining, or once you want to build a piece of generation, you can use Bitcoin mining as a way to subsidize that cost of power. If you live on an energy system and you're the only one buying power, the power is very expensive because you're the only one having to help support that entire generating asset. So if you have more buyers of power on those systems, you can reduce the cost of power and spread it across multiple people. So what you can do is you can put solar farms in El Salvador, and you can have a Bitcoin miner right next to it, buying up the excess energy and then giving some of the energy, the cheap energy, to the locals there who don't have any access to power. So I think that would be a really good policy vertical as well for the country to explore.
That's interesting. Yeah, I have seen some approach that actually Gridless is doing in Africa, right? It's quite the same thing because in the end, it's the, yeah. So yeah. And, all right, but thank you for advice. I'm sure that the Najib's administration will hear about it. I think that's one of the main things. That's why this administration is working, because they hear the advice and they have a lot of smart people surrounding them, right? Not just from El Salvador, but around the world. But also, what lessons from El Salvador should other nations consider if they are looking to adopt Bitcoin? We're now entering your field about Bitcoin as strategic reserve.
Yeah, I mean, we all should be holding more Bitcoin. The country has done very well for itself with its Bitcoin holdings, and I believe it will continue to do well for itself. We need countries to follow suit. We need them to copy what El Salvador has done. We want every country to hold Bitcoin. Everyone should be a part of the Bitcoin network. If you want to save for the future, if you want to save your finances for your country, if you want to be able to improve the budget for your state, Bitcoin is a great solution for this. You know, I travel the country, I travel the world, and there is very significant budget shortfalls, budget deficits because of the inflation, because of the cost of everything going up. And it's devastating for some of these states where they will either have to dramatically raise their taxes or they will have to cut a lot of really important programs. It's a really tough decision. It's a really tough place that a lot of these states have found themselves in. So I believe that we should have states buying Bitcoin in order to save for the future. If the states here in America had held 5% or 10% of their treasury in Bitcoin through the inflationary years, they would be much better off. They probably wouldn't even have a deficit at all. So we certainly want to see more countries and more states buy Bitcoin, just like El Salvador has bought Bitcoin.
And what shift have you observed recently regarding nation states adoption of Bitcoins? Are motivations right now like primarily financial, ideological, political? What's going on right now?
So internationally, there's a number of different countries that are looking at starting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And then there are ones who already have. You know, there are rumors that there are up to 5 different countries who already hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet for the purpose of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But they are holding back in releasing that information because it doesn't, you know, of course, it doesn't help them to tell people that they're buying Bitcoin because the price of Bitcoin could go up based on that news and they want to continue buying Bitcoin. So there is going to be a lot of development on the international side. But more importantly, I think it's, you know, if you look at what's happening in the United States, a lot of people, they look at the United States as a whole, at the federal government, as the opportunity. But the states in the US are some of the biggest economies in the world. California is the 4th or 5th largest economy in the entire world. Texas is the 8th largest economy in the entire world. So these states, although they might seem smaller than the US government, in some ways they are much bigger than a lot of the countries that are considering the purchase of Bitcoin today. So getting even just one of these big states to get across the finish line with this policy vertical would be a huge development in the case for adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet.
Absolutely. Hold on. I want to ask you about that because, several people asked me about the difference that what you're doing between the federal level and the state level, because, El Salvador is a small country, so we don't have that. And right now I live in Europe, so I quite understand how it works differently, the EU, then each country, and then they have to adapt them. But what is important to implement? I know that it's to get more Bitcoin, but beside that, what is important to implement the Bitcoin strategic reserve at the state level before the federal adoption? What are the key legal or bureaucratic differences?
So for the state level, we really want to see states buy Bitcoin for the reason I mentioned earlier, which is that they can protect their budgets and they can prepare for these really sort of extreme events. Nobody likes when these really bad events happen, but they do happen, every 10, 20, 30 years. We see a really, really bad economic event take place. And we can't, it's very hard to prepare for these events. We shouldn't have to prepare for these events as individuals, but our governments can prepare for these events because they have a longer time horizon and they can buy Bitcoin and hold it as a strategic reserve, as a financial shock absorber for these really, really extreme cases that pop up every 10, 20, 30 years. So that's one of the main reasons why we want states to buy Bitcoin. And we think that they will buy Bitcoin. There are already some who have said that they will pass this legislation into law. We're working with one state in particular where we believe it's a near 100% guarantee that they pass strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation into law. The states will greatly benefit by having that tool as a financial shock absorber and also as a way to create a check and balance against runaway monetary debasement. The federal government has a money printer. They have the ability to expand their budget to whatever they want. The states don't have those abilities. They don't have the ability to print money in an unlimited fashion, but they can buy monetary debasement insurance, which is exactly what Bitcoin is. And it's why they should hold it in a strategic reserve.
And do you think that it's very likely that Trump is going to make a law? How does it call that when you make a law in the first 100 days?
So he may do an executive order. It's possible.
Executive order, yeah.
It's possible. He could do an executive order to get the ball rolling. There's a lot of people that believe he should do that. There's a lot of people believe that he will do that. There's also even members of Congress who believe that that's a great first step. And then eventually, of course, you would wrap around with legislation to keep the strategic Bitcoin reserve intact so that we don't lose it. Because if you have a executive order in place, the next president can come along and he can use an executive order to wipe that out with the stroke of a pen. So it's important to have legislation in place because legislation will stand the test of time. An executive order is, sort of like building your house on rocky soil or on sand. Of course, it's great to get the ball rolling for this policy vertical, but we firmly believe and support the need for legislation around a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
And what if he doesn't do the executive order in the first 100 days? How long does it take to approve that law? Or how much? In other words, how much time will you have to keep working with the states?
It could be something that happens very quickly. It could be something that happens within the first 100 days. However, it's more likely that it takes at least a year, if not 2 years, to get this thing across the finish line. So it could be, it really, there's multiple ways that it could go. It could be an executive order followed up with legislation. It could be legislation in the first 100 days. That's a difficult shot, but it could also be legislation that goes through the normal process. 100 days is obviously the goal, but you could have it go a year, 2 years. I think you need to get it done. I think you really want to get it done in the first year, but if you can't, ultimately at the end of the day, we're never going to stop fighting to get this across the finish line. We will get it across the finish line, but we want, of course, to do it sooner than later. The people that adopt Bitcoin sooner benefit much better than the people that adopt it later.
Yeah. And when you meet the politicians, what's your approach to introducing Bitcoin? Because given that you likely have only a brief window, like maybe 10 minutes to talk to them or even less, to make your case, how do you distill Bitcoin's value into an executive summary that they can understand? And additionally, Do you find that most lawmakers are aware of the critical difference between Bitcoin and crypto? Because you see, that's one of the things that I saw when Donald Trump was in the Bitcoin conference, that he always used the word Bitcoin and crypto. So I don't know how much he knows the difference, because it seems like he was putting all in the same bag, and it seems that he still needs a little bit more work to do on that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that some lawmakers can tell the difference between the two. Senator Lummis certainly does. A lot of lawmakers, they really like when we break down Bitcoin based on its benefits. So we talk a lot about the benefits of Bitcoin, everything from the ability to balance the grid with Bitcoin mining to the ability to provide a financially inclusive monetary unit with Bitcoin as a money. The best way to approach lawmakers is always to talk about it through the lens of how it can benefit the country and how it can benefit people. That works really well. We use that strategy quite a bit, and we'll continue to use that, as well as with the strategic Bitcoin reserve. We use the same approach. What are the benefits of a strategic Bitcoin reserve? It's a financial shock absorber. It's inflation insurance. It's a hedge against BRICS. You know, a lot of people, they don't think enough about where the world is going. We are potentially entering a multipolar world. BRICS has been growing very rapidly. They just added a bunch of new countries to BRICS. BRICS is, from a power perspective, they have I think it's double the purchasing power now of the United States.
Wow.
So double the purchasing power of the United States. Their GDP, based on which metric you use, their GDP outstrips the G7. So there's a huge amount of ability for them to compete in the world stage. BRICS is growing, and it's going to become stronger. And you even saw Trump tweet about it, saying that if they create their own currency, that he would place tariffs on everyone. So it's obvious that that BRICS has become competitive. Otherwise, the next president of the United States, Donald Trump, would not need to say that he is threatening them. So we're entering, in my opinion, we're entering a multipolar world where you're going to have the G7, you're going to have BRICS, you're going to have the United States and SWIFT, and we're going to need an interoperable monetary layer that can be neutral. We need neutral money as we enter a multipolar world. Otherwise, we're going to enter a period where really bad things can happen. Whenever we fight over who controls the monetary system of this planet, of the world, whoever wins has a lot of power. Whoever has control over that has a lot of power. We want to make sure that we don't let BRICS take that system over, but they may try. And there's a theory that we could enter mass conflict, because whenever you see both sides compete and they become hostile, there is a high chance that those two sides decide to enter mass conflict. World War I, World War II, these are the things that happen when we fight over power, over who controls the world. So I think it's more important than ever that we have a neutral monetary system like Bitcoin that can ensure that countries that don't want to play brinksmanship between BRICS and the G7 have a way to operate outside and between those two systems.
Cuando dejas tus activos digitales en un exchange o en custodia de alguien más, te expones a riesgos de terceros no deseados. A diferencia del sistema bancario tradicional, Bitcoin te permite tomar el control total de tus fondos utilizando tus propias claves privadas. Esto te permite ser soberano y esencialmente tu propio banco. Al tomar el control de tus Bitcoin, puedes evitar riesgos innecesarios de terceros. Almacenar tus Bitcoin en custodia de terceros, como los exchanges, puede exponerte a ataques de actores malintencionados, gobiernos o estafadores que lo único que quieren es apoderarse de tu dinero. Las billeteras de hardware aumentan la seguridad de tu billetera porque tus claves privadas se almacenan en un dispositivo especializado que no está siempre conectado al Internet. Como te he dicho antes, mantener tus claves almacenadas en un dispositivo en línea puede exponerte a factores adicionales de ataque, por lo que se recomienda usar una billetera de hardware al almacenar grandes cantidades de Bitcoin durante largos periodos de tiempo. Jade es una billetera de hardware no custodial para Bitcoins y Liquid que ofrece opciones de firma simple y firmas múltiples. Yo personalmente lo utilizo para almacenar mis Bitcoins, ya que me siento mucho más seguro manteniendo mis Bitcoins en una billetera fría que en una almacenada, por ejemplo, en mi teléfono. Si estás pensando en adquirir uno para ti, no olvides utilizar el código de descuento de nuestro show, BitCorner Podcast. De esta forma estarás apoyando directamente el show y además obtendrás un 10% de descuento para la compra de tu billetera fría. even they wanted to create their own CBDCs, right? I think actually Brazil has their own small one. So yeah, it's quite crazy. And by the way, how might that affect to what you were mentioning, the global system like SWIFT or the IMF, if the US were to fully integrate Bitcoin into its strategic reserves?
It gives the United States another tool in its toolbox to be able to combat those that would be interested in diminishing the role of the United States on the global stage. I believe, we don't always get it right, but I certainly believe the United States is much better positioned to operate on the global stage compared to countries like China. I would much rather the world see the United States lead than see China lead. I mean, of course, I'm an American, so and I'm competitive and I want to see my country win. But I also don't want to see Xi Jinping and the way that he sees the world. I don't want to see that become the standard for the rest of the planet. So certainly, I think that Bitcoin as a tool, as a hedge against BRICS and as a hedge against Chinese authoritarianism, is a very, very powerful tool that we can have in our toolbox. And I also think that there's a world where it actually reduces the hostilities between a lot of the countries that are currently very hostile towards each other right now, that being China, Russia, and the United States. I want to see more neutral systems, more interoperable systems that allow for more global collaboration.
Absolutely. You know what? I was thinking about these are actually recent news, and probably if they haven't, the policymakers haven't asked you yet about this, probably they will. And I don't know if you have seen, probably you did, about the Willow Strips Google's announcement that they did, and so they're going to release this quantum chip, and it's always portrayed as a potential threat to Bitcoin. So probably they will ask you about that, and because talking about the cryptography and security, right? So when you will discuss, or have you discussed with the policymakers, have you find these concerns comes up, or probably they will? So if so, how do you address their fears about Bitcoin resilience against the future quantum technology?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the current quantum computing cannot break Bitcoin. And even if it could, we can upgrade Bitcoin. It's programmable money. So we would only need to change the consensus mechanism and upgrade from SHA-256 to a more robust cryptography, one that is post-quantum. It's really not, it's a nothing. It's certainly a great way to drum up clicks and fear around Bitcoin, but this is not a problem. This is a solvable problem.
All right. Another thing that I want to ask you that now that we were talking about before recording the podcast, we were talking about Jason Lurie. What are your thoughts, especially on his thesis about Bitcoin can use as a power projection tool to secure the cyberspace? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly agree with the theory that Bitcoin is a defensive tool to be able to protect ourselves. I like Jason. I've chatted with Jason a number of different times, and I think he's doing really, really important work. I think that he has made a lot of progress, and I think the world is isn't a better place because of his work.
Yeah. So do you think that will be also an interesting approach to the policymakers to have, because one of the main things that have some way to secure even more the information, the data of the people, and not just to have Bitcoin as a reserve. Do you think they will be interested in that, or right now it's just the monetary part, the one that it remains?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important part of the conversation, and I certainly believe that we will enter a world where there is more interest in how Bitcoin can be used as a defensive tool, and that this global compute network will be a way for countries to compete against each other without having to enter mass conflict.
By the way, you have made the Bitcoin strategic reserves open source. Why did you decide to make it open source? And we know that the United States have their own ways to do the politics. You mentioned that the states and the federal level worked in different places. I have mentioned here that in Europe it's quite different. So how can the countries benefit from your Bitcoin strategic reserve, and how they can mold it to apply it to their different circumstances in whatever region of the world they are in.
Yeah, it's listen, at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that as many countries and as many people and as many states had the ability to introduce and pass into law strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. And that is why we decided to open source it on our website. We generally open source most of our model policies because we want to make sure that anybody who's interested in moving the right direction on Bitcoin at the state level is able to have access to policies that'll help get them to a good place in their country or their state. So people can go to satoshiaction.io, and under our model policy section, they can see all the different types of model policy. Of course, strategic Bitcoin reserve being the most popular right now. We do have a number of states, up to 10 states at least, that are going to be introducing this legislation. So very excited about where we're headed legislatively. And this is just really the beginning of what we can accomplish with Bitcoin.
Have other countries contacted you already about how to apply the Bitcoin strategic reserve in their own countries? If you know.
Yep, we're talking to 4 countries in total right now.
That's awesome. Dennis, we're gonna start wrapping up. I have 2 more questions for you. But one, I want to tell you that in the podcast, we have this little game that my previous guest have a prepared question for my next guest. So my previous guest have a prepared question for you. And of course, you will have the opportunity to make your own question for the next guest. Well, you already know who's my next guest. But before that, I want to share with you the question from BitMaker. I don't know if you know him, but he's a guy that he's making this open source Bitcoin mining. And in El Salvador, especially, the kids are using it in node nations to learn about Bitcoin mining. So it's quite an amazing tool. So he had a question for you.
Antes que nada, enhorabuena. Enhorabuena por el trabajo que está haciendo, porque estoy convencido de que hablar de Bitcoin a ese nivel, a un nivel político, tiene que ser algo complicadísimo. Porque desde luego, si a la gente de a pie ya le puede costar entenderlo, no me quiero imaginar cómo tiene que ser trasladarlo a alguien que directamente piensa que va en su contra. Así que, antes que nada, enhorabuena. Entonces, partiendo de esta premisa, a mí me encantaría saber cuál cree él que puede ser el siguiente país que adopte a Bitcoin como moneda de curso legal.
It's a great, yeah, that's a great, I love it. That's a fun way to do it. Actually have them recorded and asking a question back to me. So, the answer to that question, I might want to separate it away from legal tender, because legal tender is very difficult to accomplish. This is actually the conversation that I have with a lot of people in the space, that they believe that the reason why we haven't seen a lot of countries copy El Salvador's approach to legal tender is because it's much more difficult to do than a lot of people realize. Really, what Kelly was able to pull off so early in Bitcoin's history is I don't think it'll ever really be replicatable. I think he really did something very special there. Now, can countries buy Bitcoin? Can they get rid of capital gains on Bitcoin? Yes, definitely. I think that those things will happen. I think that they can happen. There is a really, really great way to think about the direction that we're headed in. And without sharing too much information, I certainly believe that there will be other countries that establish strategic reserves. I know that there are some that already theoretically are, according to rumors. I have to talk to them directly myself before I can confirm. And then there are some that are in the process of building it. So those 2 places, in my opinion, the hotbeds of where that activity is going to take place is going to be in Latin America. I can't say where because I already know where it's at. And then also, in my opinion, in the Middle East. You're going to have, in my opinion, you already have it happening in the Middle East. There is multiple people saying now out loud that this is taking place. I can't confirm it, but certainly the Middle East is going to be a hotbed for adoption. And then, of course, Latin America, I think really predominantly more South America will be a target as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, in South America, I have a bet. I have a guess about which one it could be. And I think, guys, this could be Suriname, but I cannot confirm about that either. But you mentioned that probably what El Salvador did, it's quite difficult to replicate, but why? For example, this another small country and this global south wants to replicate it. Do you think it's hard to make because of the corruption? Because we had to handle the corruptions and at the same time Bitcoin, right? So it was hand by hand, because otherwise I think if the corruption in the government still happened, we couldn't have this to make us a success, right? So what are your thoughts?
So I think that you have a problem with the difficulty of creating a legal tender process. It's a lot more work than most people give it credit. You have to have really, truly full control of the government in order to get these things across the finish line. And you have to be popular, because it is risky. And if you do it and it doesn't go well, or even if it goes well and people are upset at you because you're not popular, you could lose your position, you could lose your office. Bukele has a lot of control in the sense that his party, and it's his government that he's running. He had the ability and did enact the legal tender there in El Salvador, but it's very, very difficult to pull that off in other parts of the world where there isn't so much control by one person. In places where there is a lot of control by one person, I could see it being more possible, or where the government is very, very strongly aligned and the person leading that government is also very pro-Bitcoin. Now, that could happen. It's the combination of events that is very difficult to achieve. But things like, making a strategic Bitcoin reserve, it's not as difficult as legal tender in most countries. I'm sure that some country will come along and eventually do legal tender again, but it has just proven to be more difficult than people gave it credit for after El Salvador did it so quickly.
Yeah, gotcha. Dennis, my last question is that we have seen that we had in the past in our history books the gold standard before Nixon did what he did. But how long, and if you see, or maybe the question is, when do you see that we're going to have a real Bitcoin standard around the world, just like we had with the gold standard?
We're on our way. We are headed that direction. There is a lot of positive headway that's happened in the last 4 years, especially the election. The outcome of the election really set us off into a totally new path. A lot of people lost their offices because of their opposition to Bitcoin, and a lot of people won their offices because of their support of Bitcoin. That really changed things pretty dramatically here in the United States. And when the United States is pro-Bitcoin, that is going to lead to a world that becomes pro-Bitcoin, because when the United States leads on something, usually we can get the whole world to follow along with us, given our leadership in the geopolitical arena. So certainly I believe it's coming. Hard to say when, but we've made significant progress and strides towards making that a reality.
Absolutely. You see, that's one thing that I have been aware of, that, and is that now millennials is our turn to do the job, and we're doing it. I have seen a lot of Bitcoiners right now working in the politics. So, last question: are you gonna run to the presidency in the future?
Am I going to run for the presidency
in the future?
Listen, ultimately, I care a lot about this country. I believe that we have a lot of things. We have a lot of problems here. We're doing good things on Bitcoin, but we have a big problem. We're very divided. We're very angry at each other these days in this country. We need to get away from this divisiveness. We need to start figuring out how to work together again. We need to run the United States much better. We are a leader. We can't have so much internal fighting. So I certainly believe that there are things that I could do if I was ever to run for office that I think would help bring this country together. I'm very good at working across the aisle. I'm very good at working with both sides. I am what people would say an ambassador for Bitcoin. I do a great job of talking about Bitcoin with Republicans, with Democrats, with conservatives, with liberals, with libertarians, with other people in other parts of the world. I think I would be well suited to be able to help bring this country together, because I know how to work with everyone from everywhere and help them to align their interests. I don't think that I'm ready anytime soon for this type of run, but that would certainly be something that would be very important to me to bring this country back together.
That's awesome. Dennis, I wish you a lot of luck. You're doing a great job. Hopefully we'll see great news from you. I have seen that you're working a lot, so yeah, it's a tough work, but someone needs to do it. And just thank you for stopping by to the podcast and share your thoughts and everything.
Thank you, Juan. It was great to be on here with you and great to chat with you.